F. 11 most terrifying zoo accidents in history. I ain't gonna lie, I love the zoo. And I love animals. So, like, I find it interesting and entertaining. I'm concerned of, like, what happened in the enclosure, in the animal enclosure type shit. Like, why are there accidents in the zoo? I mean, I heard of some, but I actually want to see that shit. So, let me stop talking. Let's get into the video.
The chance of being killed by a lemur in a zoo is vanishingly small.
Bro, these folks ugly as fuck. These folks too fucking ugly.
The chance of being killed by a lemur in a zoo is vanishingly
These folks ugly as hell.
Small, but not zero. In March 2022, Ronnie Carroll entered a lemur enclosure in Georgia.
Why?
Carrying his 17-month-old son, Lawrence.
Why?
Suddenly, a lemur leapt onto the toddler's head, digging its sharp nails into his face and scalp. The father managed to shove the animal away, but not before the attack left Lawrence with deep cuts. The boy was rushed to the hospital, where doctors treated him with antibiotics to prevent infection. And while that accident left the boy with lifelong scars, people in the next 9 cases weren't nearly as lucky. But first, as always, viewer discretion is
Bro, why is that quality bullshit? Come on, fools, now. Oh, here we go. Here we go, chat. Here we go.
August 3rd, 1996 was supposed to be just another...
Hold on, let me...
summer afternoon, full of ice cream, restless kids, and parents desperately shouting, "Don't climb that!" And suddenly, a 3-year-old boy lost his footing while leaning over the gorilla enclosure at the Tropic World exhibit in Brookfield Zoo. By the time his parents realized what had happened, he had already fallen more than 5 meters. The blow to his head knocked him unconscious almost instantly. Blood pooled from a deep gash as horrified relatives and visitors screamed. Meanwhile, below, 7 western lowland gorillas turned toward the noise. And then came the moment no one saw coming. A 150-kilogram gorilla approached the unconscious boy. Her name was Binti Joie, a Swahili phrase meaning daughter of sunshine. Binti was 8 years old and had never seen a human inside her enclosure before. For a few long seconds, the crowd held its breath, unsure of what the frightened animal might do next. But to everyone's surprise, Binti gently cradled the boy in her powerful arms, carried him to a service door where zookeepers could safely reach him, and then backed away. The child was pulled out, rushed to the hospital, and treated for a broken hand and a deep cut to his face sustained during the fall. After the incident, Binti Joie became an international sensation. Her act of compassion featured in newspapers, on television, and even on numerous talk shows. However, not every animal encounter is a heartwarming tale, since sometimes even the gentlest looking creatures can snap when pushed too far. On January 7th, 2009, 32-year-old Zhang Zhao brought his 5-year-old son to Beijing Zoo to see pandas for the first time. The little boy, clutching a toy, beamed with excitement until it suddenly slipped from his hands and tumbled into the moat of the panda enclosure. The child burst into tears, and like any loving father desperate to make things right, Zhang climbed over the barrier to retrieve it. He dropped nearly 3 meters into the enclosure, unaware that a 110-kilogram male panda named Gugu was already watching him intently. In an instant, Gugu lunged. He clamped his jaws around Zhang's leg, sinking his teeth deep into the muscle, all the way to the bone, before seizing the other leg. Zookeepers rushed in with poles, desperately trying to break the panda's grip. But when they finally pulled Zhang free, both his legs were mauled, all in front of his shocked son. Eventually, the zoo paid for Zhang's initial surgeries, but refused any further compensation. After all, he himself had entered the enclosure of a predator with a known history of aggression. In 2006, Gugu bit a drunken man who had climbed into his cage and tried to hug him. A year later, he attacked a 15-year-old boy, leaving him with serious injuries. And while the incidents with Gugu...
This man do not fuck with humans.
...for reckless human behavior, the next case was no accident at all, but rather something carefully and deliberately planned.
Now, why is you even going into a bear enclosure for?
Franco Ferrata wrote a letter.
It's not smart.
Words about God, salvation, and sacrifice, with rough sketches of lions scrawled along the margins. Carrying it in his pocket, he walked alone in the Santiago Metropolitan Zoo. At first, he blended in, just another visitor buying a ticket to see the animals. But what he did next shocked everyone. Ferrata climbed onto a restricted platform above the lion enclosure. He stripped off all his clothes and shouted to the stunned crowd, "God will protect me. This is my purpose." And then he jumped straight into the den of predators. 2 adult lions, a 200-kilogram male and a 140-kilogram female, moved toward the intruder with cautious curiosity.
Dumb
At
shit.
first, they simply watched him, but the moment Ferrata raised his arms and shouted, everything changed. The male struck first, wrapping his powerful paws around Ferrata's body and biting into his chest. The lioness followed seconds later, sinking her teeth into his leg. With a bite force of nearly 1,000 psi, 3 times stronger than a pit bull's, their jaws tore through skin, muscle, and tendon. Pinned beneath them, Ferrata had no chance of escape. Meanwhile, zookeepers tried everything to stop the attack, blasting water from hoses, throwing chunks of meat to distract the lions, even firing tranquilizer darts. But nothing worked, and as if things couldn't get worse, one of the darts struck Ferrata himself.
Oh!
In the end, there was no other option to save the
He's
man's
dead.
life, and the zookeepers were forced to make a devastating decision. They shot both lions.
Damn.
Ferrata was dragged out, barely breathing, his body riddled with deep wounds and his mind clouded by the tranquilizer. Yet he survived. But instead of relief, the public mourned the 2 healthy, socialized lions, killed because one man chose to step into their enclosure and call it destiny in his farewell letter. And unbelievably, this wasn't the only case of someone deliberately leaping straight into a predator's grasp. On
That's
Good
some
Friday,
dumb shit,
April
fool.
10,
They just killed them
2009,
lions for shit, for real.
32-year-old Mandy Kay arrived alone at the Berlin Zoo. But instead of watching animals or taking photos, she slipped past the fence, pushed through thorny bushes, and scaled the wall of the polar bear enclosure. Moments later, during the feeding time, she suddenly jumped. As soon as she hit the cold water with a splash, 4 adult polar bears turned. In an instant, one of them surged toward her, clamping its jaws into her arms, then her back. Mandy screamed, thrashing in the blood-stained moat as the crowd erupted in panic. Only minutes earlier, she had believed there was nothing left to live for, but now she held on to hope for a miracle.
Ooh.
Zookeepers acted swiftly, tossing chunks of meat to lure the bears away and life rings toward Mandy. And after several desperate attempts, they finally managed to pull her out. Torn and bleeding, barely clinging to life, Mandy was rushed to Virchow Hospital. Her arms, legs, and back were shredded by deep wounds, yet she miraculously survived. In the aftermath, the public was divided. Some branded her reckless, while others saw a woman consumed by despair. Meanwhile, a zoo representative refused to introduce new barriers, summing it up grimly with one single phrase: "No wall stops those determined to fall." And, in a way, he was right, since sometimes danger waits only a few centimeters beyond the fence, as the next case would prove. Joanne, another visitor at the Darling Downs Zoo. She was practically part of it. Her sister co-owned the family-run sanctuary in rural Queensland, and Joanne had spent years walking its paths and treating the lions like old friends. But on July 6, 2025, friendship met raw animal instinct. That day, the zoo was closed to the public, with only staff moving quietly through its territory. Joanne had early access to observe the lions' morning routine, which included cleaning their enclosures and prepping their feed. As keepers moved a lioness into a holding pen, Joanne leaned in for a closer look, far closer than even trained staff are ever supposed to be. In an instant, the lioness lunged through a narrow gap in the bars. Her claws hooked Joanne's sleeve, and her jaws clamped down on the poor woman's arm. Joanne screamed in agony as, within seconds, the lioness crushed her bones and nearly tore the flesh apart. Keepers rushed in, using emergency tools to pry the lioness back. Joanne, still conscious, was dragged to safety, with her arm barely attached. She was airlifted to Brisbane's Princess Alexandra Hospital, where surgeons fought for hours to save her limb. In the end, unfortunately, there was only one option: amputation above the elbow. Still, weeks later, during recovery, Joanne never blamed the lioness. Instead, she simply said she was just being herself. The zoo, in turn, immediately strengthened safety protocols, reinforcing barriers, posting clearer warnings, and restricting staff access during big cat transfers. After all, how do you protect people any further when every step already screams, "Do not get too close"? And the next
These
man
folks
ignored
dumb,
that warning,
fool, like-
despite being a zoo worker.
They think
On
these
December
animals be
29th,
bullshit.
2021,
These folks
a
are
911
real.
call came
Used to
through
be in the
emergency
wild,
lines in
cuz.
Naples, Florida.
Help me! Help me! I'm at Naples Zoo! Help me, please! I'm at Naples Zoo! Okay, what's happening? I'm being attacked by a tiger. Please, please, please.
The caller was 26-year-old River Rosenquist, a janitor working part-time at the Naples Zoo. But that night, instead of mopping floors as scheduled, Rosenquist climbed over a nearly 1-meter barrier and stepped into a restricted zone clearly marked authorized personnel only. He then walked straight toward the enclosure of Eco, an 8-year-old Malayan tiger, one of only 200 left in the world. Rosenquist reached through the steel mesh, likely to pet the animal. In that instant, Eco clamped his jaw around Rosenquist's arm
Like
and
these
dragged it
folks-
deeper into the cage. The man screamed for help, but no one came. Alone and in agony, he somehow managed to pull out his phone and call 911 himself. By the time deputies arrived, Eco was still locked onto Rosenquist's arm. And with the zoo's emergency team, the only ones equipped with tranquilizers, gone for the night, officers had no choice. To save the man, they shot one of Earth's rarest predators. Authorities called the shooting a tragic necessity, but animal rights activists and the public flooded social media with grief and outrage, blaming not the tiger, but the man who crossed the line. Yet Rosenquist didn't face any charges, as technically his actions didn't violate any law. In the next case, a mother lifted
Bruh,
her
these
son
folks
to see the
wanna-
animals
wanna-
more clearly, but
wanna be
one
best
quick
friends with
movement brought
some
them closer
predators.
to the wild than she ever intended. It was a crisp Sunday morning in early November 2012, the kind that filled the Pittsburgh Zoo with weakened families. Among them were Elizabeth and Jason Durkosh, carrying their only child, Maddox, a curious, lively 2-year-old who had been running around in a Superman costume just days earlier on Halloween. The family made their way to one of the zoo's highlights, the African painted dog exhibit. Visitors stood on a raised wooden deck, protected by a 1-meter railing designed to prevent them from leaning too far. Signs along the rail warned clearly, "Do not lift children." Still, as other parents had done before, Elizabeth lifted Maddox for a better look at the rare pack below. If only she'd known what would happen next. Maddox weighed less than 14 kilograms. In a sudden, unbalanced movement, he slipped from her arms. The fall was 3.35 meters. First onto a narrow
11
safety
feet.
net, the kind meant to catch dropped sunglasses or phones. It couldn't hold his weight. He bounced off and landed in the enclosure with 11 African wild dogs. As soon as Maddox's small body hit the ground and rolled, one African wild dog trotted closer. Within seconds, the rest of the pack closed the distance. 11 predators surrounded him. From the viewing deck above, visitors began to scream. Elizabeth's voice rose over them all, raw, desperate, calling her son's name again and again, while below, the dogs had already swarmed him. They darted in from every side, clamping down with powerful jaws, tugging him off balance, dragging him across the dirt. Zookeepers burst in with noisemakers and lures, dragging 7 of the dogs toward a far corner of the enclosure. Dummy tranquilizer darts were fired at the rest, but they had no effect in time. The remaining dogs kept attacking. Within minutes, police officers arrived. One particularly aggressive dog was shot dead in a final attempt to reach
Damn.
the boy. The rest scattered at last, but by then, it was already too late. Maddox had suffered over 46 devastating injuries to his head, neck, and torso. The coroner would later confirm it wasn't
Bruh,
the dog that
y'all,
killed him.
they be
It was the ball.
just doing
The zoo
shit,
shut the
fool, cause
exhibit
they
for good,
bored.
relocating the surviving dogs. Months
Hold on
later,
to your
OSHA
child
investigators
tight.
noted that keepers had previously been warned about parents lifting children at that railing, but the barrier remained unchanged. The zoo pointed to dozens of past inspections without issues. For Elizabeth, the debates didn't matter. All she could say through tears was, "He was my everything, my light. How do I live without him?" It was the first visitor death in the zoo's 114-year
Damn.
history. And although the legal battles ended in a confidential settlement, the sight of a little boy falling into the wild that day would haunt everyone who saw it forever. Maddox's death shook the zoo world, a stark reminder that even with barriers, warnings, and decades without a fatality, one lapse can cost a life. And just 8 years later, on the other side of the Atlantic, another tragedy would unfold, not in front of visitors on an open deck, but behind the closed doors of a keeper's workspace. It was early morning at Madrid Zoo Aquarium, around 10:15 a.m. Before the gates opened, in the service corridor behind the gorilla enclosure, a 46-year-old zookeeper moved through her routine. She'd been doing this for 19 years, preparing breakfast, cleaning, and administering medication to the troop. The protocol required 3 security doors to keep the dominant silverback, 29-year-old Malibu, weighing about 200 kilograms, separated from the staff. But that day, the final door stood open. Whether by mechanical malfunction or human error, the barrier had failed, and without a sound, Malibu silently appeared in the corridor. At the sight of it, the woman froze. It was too late. With a single explosive movement, Malibu struck. The first blow knocked her down. The next followed in quick succession. She received crushing blows to her arms, head, and chest, each one delivered with the controlled power of a mountain gorilla.
Look at them
Her
fucking
screams
teeth.
rang out, echoing behind metal doors. Through the viewing glass, stunned visitors who had arrived early watched in horror. Staff colleagues rushed toward the sound, grabbing safety shields and pounding on walls in a desperate bid to distract Malibu. Only after several tense moments were they able to untangle her and remove her from the enclosure. By the time paramedics reached the scene, she was barely conscious. Both arms shattered, skull fractured, internal bleeding already setting in. She was rushed to Hospital Clínico San Carlos, placed in a coma, and underwent emergency surgery. What followed was a long, painful recovery, multiple surgeries, weeks in ICU, and months of rehabilitation. It's still unclear if she will ever return to gorilla work. After the attack, Malibu was anesthetized with a tranquilizer dart, moved to a separate holding area, and described as calm once sedated. The zoo issued a statement. The keeper had accessed the facility, which is bound by 3 doors, to find the 29-year-old male gorilla had somehow made his way into the same area. Malibu had been raised by keepers since his birth and had been close to them. Despite the severity, Malibu was not euthanized.
He said,
and
fuck my
remains
parents.
alive. The zoo kept the exhibit closed.
Fuck my
for
owners.
weeks,
Fuck my guardians.
while engineers redesigned door automation and upgraded safety protocols across the facility. The Madrid attack was a brutal reminder that danger in a zoo isn't always on the public side of the barrier. Sometimes it's the people who work closest with the animals who pay the highest price. But in the next case, the line between safety and tragedy wasn't just crossed. It barely existed at all. It was the afternoon of May 10th, 2016, at Zhishiaku Wildlife Park in Rongcheng, China. The air was warm, the water in the walrus pool a dazzling blue, and at the edge of it stood 30-year-old businessman Zhou Leijun, phone in hand, broadcasting the moment to friends on WeChat. So strong, so big. He laughed into the camera, watching the massive shape glide just beneath the surface. Beside him stood Duan, a senior keeper who had cared for the walrus since it was a calf more than 10 years ago. He'd hand-fed it, trimmed its tusks, and trusted its calm nature. The barrier between them and the water was barely waist-high. Signs warned visitors to stay back. And then Jia did what far too many do in front of wild animals. He stepped forward, turning his back for a better selfie. The 1.5-ton walrus rose silently behind him, wrapping both flippers around his waist. It looked at first like a clumsy hug, but the animal dragged him backwards over the barrier and into the deep water. Zha's muffled screams cut through the laughter of onlookers as he disappeared beneath the surface. Duan didn't hesitate. He shouted, grabbed bamboo poles, and tried to hook the walrus away. When that failed, he dove in headfirst. The walrus released Zha, only to seize Duan instead. One after the other, each was forced under by the animal's sheer weight and strength. By the time rescuers tried to pull them from the water, it was already too late. Both had drowned. The zoo called it a tragedy born from human error. Zha's family received 900,000 won in compensation. The walrus stayed in his pool, its tusks trimmed, unaware it had just been at the center of a national news storm. In the days after, workers raised the barriers and
That
added
bitch is
new warning
ugly.
signs. Changes that, for 2 families, came far too late. While plane crashes claim around 350 lives each year, and lightning strikes take an astonishing 24,000, fatal incidents in zoos are statistically rare, averaging just 1 death annually. But rarity doesn't mean
That's good.
impossibility. And the 10 cases you've just seen are proof of how brutal and unpredictable these encounters can become, especially when caution gives way to recklessness. Now let me ask you, Have you ever experienced a moment at the zoo that still gives you chills? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that just might make you think twice before underestimating the predators behind the bars.
Bro, them folks really just curious about predators that they know that that's going to take their lives. They don't love their lives. They are just doing something just to do it. That's not very smart, bro. And they know it. I don't know what's going on in here, bro. I don't know what it is.